Welcome to today's Explainer. If you've ever turned on the news and just felt totally overwhelmed by the sheer volume of US political drama, well, you are definitely not alone. But here's the thing. Beneath all that daily noise and the literally billions of dollars spent trying to capture your attention, there actually lies a highly structured, truly fascinating piece of machinery. So today, we're going to strip away all the partisan spin and just map out the rigorous, neutral framework of how this massive political system actually operates. Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to build your understanding in 5 super quick, efficient steps. First, we'll look at how the machinery of US politics actually works. Second, we'll check out the current political landscape. Third, we'll break down the top issues in recent events. Fourth, we'll look at public opinion and where the deep divides are. And finally, we'll explore the global impact and some predictions for what comes next. All right, starting us off with Section 1, how U.S. politics works. Because to understand the current debates, we really have to understand the machinery first. To make sense of the headlines, we need a good mental model. So think of the U.S. government like a massive, high-stakes group project. Now, in most school projects, one person inevitably takes over, right? But the founders were absolutely terrified of concentrated power, so they deliberately engineered this system to ensure that never happens. Different teams have incredibly specific jobs, and they are literally forced to cooperate to submit the final assignment. No one can do it alone. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how that power is divided. We've got the 3 main teams side by side here. The executive branch, led by the president, they execute and enforce the laws. But they can't just make them up. That is the legislative branch's job. Congress acts as the writers. And finally, the judicial branch, headed by the Supreme Court, is essentially the ultimate referee, making sure everything aligns with the Constitution. It's a giant balancing act. If one team oversteps, the other 2 are specifically authorized to yank them right back. But wait, Washington, D.C. isn't the whole story. The U.S. actually operates 50 individual mini-governments. Each state has its own governor, its own legislature, its own courts, and they hold massive independent power. This is exactly why a single state, like California, can set its own environmental standards that end up completely reshaping the global auto industry. Power isn't just divided at the top, it is divided all the way down. Moving right along to Section 2, the current political landscape. Let's look at who's actually operating this machine right now. So this machine is primarily operated by 2 major, heavily entrenched political parties. And they come to the table with fundamentally opposed philosophies on things like how large the government should be and exactly where your tax dollars should go. That daily friction you see on the news, that is simply the major figures, the presidents, senators, governors, grabbing the levers of this machine and pulling with all their might in totally opposite directions. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is when you put the current administration's priorities right next to the opposition's priorities, a very clear structural reality emerges. Political gridlock isn't a bug in the system, it's often the intended result. You have 2 massive forces pushing against each other with roughly equal strength. And that means practically nothing moves forward without some really painful, drawn-out compromises. Which brings us to Section 3, top issues and recent events. This is the raw material currently being fed into the system. It's a massive tug of war across so many fronts. At the kitchen table, people are talking about the economy, inflation, and taxes. Culturally, there are these deep structural debates over immigration, healthcare, and education. But at the exact same time, lawmakers are scrambling to write the very first rules for things like artificial intelligence and global climate energy. Every single bullet point you see here represents a massive negotiation happening right now across those 3 branches of government. Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because obviously this doesn't all happen overnight. It's a constant cause and effect loop. Look back 12 months, and public debates were shaping the agenda. Fast forward to recent months, and those debates turned into key elections and major court rulings that completely shifted the legal boundaries. And all of that momentum drops us right into today, where those past debates are mutating into active, heavily contested laws. Okay, on to Section 4, public opinion and divides. Let's see how the public is reacting to all this. Because at the end of the day, the machine runs entirely on public fuel. Americans are strictly divided along some very clear ideological lines. And let me tell you, politicians obsessively track these shifting approval trends. A slight change in the mood of suburban voters or a minor shift in turnout for a specific age bracket, that can literally flip the entire balance of power in Congress overnight. It's a highly calculated numbers game. And finally, Section 5, Global Impact and Predictions. Let's zoom out for a second.
Because this is the crucial question we really have to ask. How does U.S. politics actually affect a nation like India, or, frankly, the rest of the world? Why on earth should someone living thousands of miles away care about which party controls the U.S. Senate or what the Supreme Court decides?
Well, it essentially boils down to these three massive pillars: trade, technology, and security. When the U.S. tweaks a tariff, it disrupts global trade, impacting factories in India and markets over in Europe. When lawmakers debate data privacy, they're essentially setting the baseline standard for global tech and AI. And shifts in foreign policy, they instantly rewrite the math for global security alliances. So the domestic outputs coming out of Washington are literally massive inputs for the rest of the planet. So the crucial point here is that while we can map out this machinery perfectly, the future is never written in stone. Expert analysis isn't a crystal ball, it's a roadmap. Analysts are constantly watching the polling data, the pending court cases, and economic indicators to anticipate how the operators might steer this machine next, all based on those structural rules we've just laid out. Equipped with this framework, you can now look right past those noisy day-to-day headlines. You can actually see the gears turning, the branches, the states, the voters, and those huge global ripple effects. So I'll leave you with this. Looking ahead, how will the next major shift in U.S. politics directly impact your local economy, the technology in your pocket, or your international security? Keep your eyes on the machinery, not the drama, and those answers are going to become incredibly clear. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.